right, well, today we're concluding a little 2-week mini-series called Yes and No, and the idea behind this whole series has been that while small, these two words, yes and no, are the two most powerful words in our language. That as you look back over your life, you see situation after situation, conversation after conversation, decision after decision that you made, and you are who and where you are today, whether it's relationally, whether it's financially, physically, whether it's even spiritually. You are who and where you are today because of the yeses and the nos that you've said in your life. And last week we said that even more than that you are also who and where you are today because of the yeses and the nos that other people have said. That again, as you look back at your life, you see moments in time where other people said yes or no, and their decision around those two words directly impacted you. And part of the reason you are who and where you are today is because of the yeses and nos that other people said. And so one of the takeaways for this series and one of the takeaways from last week was simply this, that we are the sum of yes and no in our life. Whether it's our yes and no, whether it's the yes and no of other people, that all of us are the sum of yes and no in our life. And the big takeaway for all of us as a church, even beyond this idea, as a church, the idea for this series is that you are, right, your no means that someone else has to say yes. That was the takeaway from last week, that when you say no within this church community, when you say no, there's a sense in which you're saying yes for someone else. That someone else has to give more, someone else has to serve more, someone else has to lead more, someone else will pick up, someone else will step up, someone else will step out. Every time that you say no within this community, there's a sense in which you're saying yes for someone else. And as Chris mentioned earlier, one of the things that we did at the end of last week, and for those of you that weren't here, it was, as Chris said, an incredibly powerful moment in the service, especially for me standing up here and looking out at all of you to see this moment when all of us in the auditorium had our hands up. And this is what it feels like to say yes. That yes can be exhausting, that the longer you hold your arms up in the air, that it gets tiring. Even though you want to do it, it just gets tiring after a while. And the more we say no within this community, the more we're saying yes for other people and causing them to feel just like this. More weight, more responsibility, more weight to carry, more burden to shoulder. The more we say no, the more we say yes for other people. And I talked a little bit about where we are as a church and some of the things that are happening in and within our church, and to give context as to kind of where we are and also where we're going. And we shared a number of things. We talked about just that God is at work in this place, that God is doing incredible, amazing things. And to piggyback again on what Chris said, that we get the inside track as staff and as pastors. We get the inside track into so many people's journeys and so many people's stories, and we hear these things and we often keep them to ourselves. It's not something that we share publicly, but I do need to tell you that God is at work. That God is doing things in people's lives, and across the various ministries of the church, things are happening and things are moving and things are growing. That statistically across the board in all of the ministries and all of the areas of the church, things are moving, things are growing, things are progressing. But beyond that, every single statistic represents someone's life, someone's story, someone's journey, and God is at work in the midst of so many people's lives, and it's incredibly important, incredibly powerful to be a part of. And so the challenge was to you corporately and to you individually to say yes today, to create more opportunity for other people to say yes to Jesus. That you're sitting here today because someone in the past said yes and created an opportunity for you. And we in turn want to say yes today to create an opportunity for others to say yes to Jesus. And so the challenge was the 2020 for 2020. That we are asking every single adult, every single couple to give $20.20 above and beyond whatever amount you regularly give, in order that we can collectively say yes to see God do more of what He's already doing. That I mentioned that statistically things are growing, that numbers are growing, and all of the averages and all these things are going up. And as a result, as a staff, we're in the beginning process of formulating a plan to add a third service, because we want to create more open seats, more opportunity for more and more people to come and hear the life-changing message of Jesus Christ, to hear about the hope and the purpose that's found in a relationship with Him. And so we want to create more opportunity for more and more people to hear that. So in adding a third service, and it won't end at 3, I believe there will be 3, then there'll be 4, and then there'll be 5, and we'll be moving into other locations across the Ottawa Valley, that there's so much more for us as we continue to go forward together. And so one of the things that we have to do, and there are 3 things, the first of which being, can you give me the next one there, please? I'm just going to point and you can do this for me. So one of the first things is we need to hire a worship arts pastor. That right now, the music ministry of the church is being wonderfully led by Art and Darla Fuller, but what they're doing is not sustainable as we continue to move forward. And so in 2020, we need to hire a worship arts pastor, not just to keep us maintaining where we are, but to lay a wider and deeper foundation for the future growth of the church. And so we also said that in 2020, the general fund is going to assume the mortgage of the Bridge Kids wing. And to those of you that have faithfully and generously given to build this beautiful wing for our children to be ministered to week after week, the building fund of the church has been used over the last number of years to pay that mortgage payment. But as of 2020, that mortgage payment, $160,000, will be absorbed by the general fund of the church. And so in order to do that, if we simply maintain status quo, in order to do that, we would have to cut $160,000 of daily operations in order to just simply keep the lights on. And as I shared last week, that's just simply not an option. That we want to do more than simply keep the lights on, that we want to see God do more of what He's already doing. And so that's something to take note. And the other thing is, we don't want to just simply, again, maintain status quo. We want to allow the opportunity for ministry to expand. That the ministries that are touching and reaching needs in people's lives, we want to continue to resource them in such a way that they can grow and reach more and more people and impact more and more people and be a blessing in more and more people's lives. And so in order to do that, in order to do these three things and more, we simply don't want to just end 2019 well. We want to launch into 2020 positioned to see God, expecting to see God do more of what He's already doing. And so we said that there are one of three ways that you can do 2020 for 2020, because we don't simply want you just to say, yeah, I'll do that. We want you to automate your giving. And the reason we want you to automate your giving is mainly because we recognize that from time to time you may say no to attending church on Sunday morning and may say yes to another place. You may say yes to the lake, yes to a trip, yes to staying home and watching Netflix in bed. You might say yes to something else and no to being here. But even for whatever reason you're not here, you can still say yes to the mission and the vision of the church, whether you're able to be with us on any given Sunday or not. So there are three ways, and we want every single adult, we want every single couple to automate their giving above and beyond by $20.20. If every single person did this, it would lessen the load and the burden on any one person. And so there are three ways, and I want to show them to you. The first is the Church Center app, and this is the way that we're moving in our database, and you can just access it on your phone. It's a little app, and you can go on there, and within 30 seconds, you can automate your giving. So whether you're able to be with us on any given Sunday or not, you're still able to say yes to the mission and the vision. The second one is you can text to give. You can simply text a number, and again, within 30 seconds, you can automate that giving. It's incredibly easy. And the third way is automatic withdrawal, and this is how Lisa and I give. We just simply filled out a form, and last week I wanted to add $20.20 more a week onto what we already give, which is 10% of our income. And so we add an additional $20.20 a week to that because we wanted to say yes so more and more people can say yes to Jesus. So we ask every individual and every couple to do that. Now I want to show you this picture again. This is the picture that we had from last week, and I've looked at this picture, I can't tell you how many times over the last week, and I've just kind of looked at it and marveled and wondered in my mind, what would it look like if every single one of us said yes? What would it look like? What could happen? What could be done in Jesus' name if every single one of us, and right now in this season we're talking about finances, but we could also be talking about time and talent, but if we all said yes to the future, to the mission and the vision of this church, what could happen in this community and what could happen in that community out there as a result? It's incredibly powerful, and I watched this, and what you don't see in this picture, as powerful as it is to me, what you don't see is that there's a young girl sitting in the auditorium in this picture. You don't see her right there. I didn't know about this until later, but there was a young girl, and she was sitting with her parents, and she had a little notepad with her. And she could have been doing anything, drawing, doodling pictures of unicorns and princesses, but instead, she was writing. And in this little notepad, she actually wrote down specifically 9 words. And I have a picture of her notepad. I want to show it to you. It's right here. It says, "We are the sum of our yeses and nos." That a little girl last Sunday heard those words from the stage. She saw those words on the screen, and she wrote them down in her little notebook. I had no idea. And so later on in the day after church, I went home and was just kind of laying on the couch and flipping through my phone, and this came across my social media feed, this picture with this little statement on it. I want to show you what it says. It says, "Scott bringing the word and our daughter taking notes. praying that as she sees a community say yes to God, she will learn to do the same. And to that mom, I pray the same thing. I pray the same thing every single day, but let me be as brutally honest as I can this morning. I can't pray for something that I'm not willing to do something about. I can't pray for something I'm not willing to do something about, and neither can you. So I'm asking you all, and I'm asking you individually to say yes today, to create an opportunity for someone else tomorrow to say yes to Jesus. Let's not just simply take our kids to church, like this little picture. Let's not just simply take our kids to church. Let's show them what the church was meant to be. Let's show them what the church is created and called to be. Let's show them a community. Let's show the next generation a community that together says yes to create opportunities for more people to say yes to Jesus. A few weeks ago, we did something called Love Week, and if you're visiting with us this morning, we've referenced it a couple times already this morning, but Love Week was incredibly powerful where, as an entire church, every child, every adult, we collectively came together and left this place, and for 7 days, we intentionally, radically, and generously loved this city in the name of Jesus. It was an incredible week. I loved it so much, I can hardly wait for next year to do it all over again. But one of the things that happened during Love Week that was really cool was we went to a gentleman in our church, and he serves in our guest services team, and we went to him and we gave him an envelope full of cash, the red bills. Like we gave him like a whole bunch of, like a whole envelope full of them. We said, we want you to go over to the Centrum and we just want you to give it away. Just go and randomly just bless people. And we in our minds, when we thought of this, we thought, that's going to be easy. Like, I mean, who doesn't want money? Like, who doesn't want just free money, random people just coming up and saying, hey, here's a 50. Like, that's weird. So we kind of thought it was going to be awesome. But what was really interesting was this gentleman went over to the Centrum and was told no repeatedly. Now, they didn't know that he was offering them money. He just went up and introduced himself and said, hey, I'm from the church. And the minute they heard the word church, dozens of people ran. Like, went in the opposite direction, put their hands up, said no. Some of them were rude. And we're thinking, this is hilarious. They have no idea. We're trying to give them money, something that every one of them, my guess is, would want, but they turned down a blessing. They said no to a blessing that they had no idea was just about to come their way, and have no idea that because of their impression, their experience with church, that they said no. And that is the culture. That's the mindset, that's the perspective, that's the experience that you and I are called to do something about. That you and I together, as we say yes, are called to be, as Jesus said, like a city on a hill that can't be hidden, a light in the darkness. You and I have been called, you and I were wired for revolution. We were created to change and shape the culture's mindset, not just on church, but on who and what Jesus is and what Jesus has come to do for them. And we get to do that together. So much so that the more we say yes together, the more people will say yes to Jesus, even though right now they may say no. That we could actually see something unbelievable happen in our community through the yes of this community. And for the rest of our time together, I kind of want to quickly show you what I mean. Jesus grew up on the north side of Galilee in a place that was known as the Triangle, and it was called the Triangle because it was the center, or was believed to be the center of Jewish thought. So when we talk about Nazareth and things like that around, Bethlehem around Christmas time, it wasn't some far-off, magical, kind of random place. This was actually the center of current Jewish thought. And there was all sorts of discussion in the Triangle. There was all sorts of discussion among Jewish rabbis as to what age do you begin to teach a child the Torah meaning the first 5 books of the Bible. And there's some different interesting quotes. One rabbi, a modern-day rabbi, says this. I want to show you what he says. Under the age of 6, we do not receive a child as a pupil, but from 6 upwards, accept him and stuff him with Torah like an ox. Okay, so they take this really seriously. There's all sorts of discussion among the rabbis. At what age do you take a kid and do you teach him the Torah? Because they didn't take, what they shared with the next generation lightly. They took it very, very seriously. Josephus says this, it's very interesting. He says, above all, we pride ourselves on the education of our children. And so in the Jewish education system, there were a number of different tiers, a number of different levels, similar to ours, but I want to show you what they are. The first one is this, Bet Safar, and this is ages 6 to 10. And at age 6 to 10, this typically happened in a synagogue, was usually taught by a local rabbi. And young boys and girls, young Jewish boys and girls from the ages of 6 to 10 would memorize the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, memorized by the age of 10 years old. And all God's people said, whoa, right? Like, it's like, you hear that and you're like, there's no way I could do that, right? But what's really interesting is we can sing songs in the car with no music. We remember lyrics to songs. We can recall quotes from movies and television shows like that. So it's not that we don't have the ability, it's just that in our culture, we focus and stress different things. So that was the first age group, 6 to 10, Bet Safar. The next one is Bet Talmud, and this is ages 10 to 14. And Talmud is the Hebrew word for student, and a Talmudim would be a rabbi's student. And so between the ages of 10 and 14, a student would begin to memorize the Psalms, the rest of the book, the prophets, the rest of the Hebrew scriptures. So by the age 14, a good Jewish boy, and Jesus grew up in this culture, they would have the entire Hebrew scriptures memorized. And more than that, by the age of 14, they would be engaged in the Jewish education system of questions and answers. Now, in our culture, in our Western education system, we rely heavily on information transfer, right? So it's a lot of time, it's a monologue from a teacher to students, and we're into this transfer and just making sure that kids know it. And so in our system, a teacher might say to their student, 2 plus 2 equals, and the student would say, 4. That's right. It wasn't a trick question. So that's good. I'm glad everybody's awake. So you would say 2 plus 2 equals 4. But that's not how the Jewish education system worked. They didn't focus simply on information transfer. That they would use this Jewish art of questions and answers to help a student not just know the answer, but be able to process the information in such a way that they could kind of bob and weave with it a little bit, that they could hear a question and formulate and process the information and then give a question back. So in the Jewish system, a rabbi might say to a student, 2 plus 2 equals, and the student would say, what is 25% of 16? And that way, the teacher would know that the student not only knew the answer, but was able to process it in such a way that they could then give a question back. And so this is this age group, 10 to 14, Bet Talmud. And where this gets fascinating is when you understand this and then look into the scriptures, specifically the book of Luke, which is the 3rd book in the New Testament, one of 3 books known as the Gospels, the books that chronicle the life of Jesus. When you look into Luke chapter 2, you discover that when Jesus was 12 years old, his parents took him to the temple. And they went to the temple. We don't know necessarily how long they were there, but we know that they left. And when they left, because of the way they traveled in caravans. It wasn't like when they traveled, they got everybody in the minivan and kind of went on a trip. They went as a huge collection of people. So after they leave the temple, they had no idea that they had left Jesus behind. So it was kind of like this Home Alone scenario where 3 days later, they kind of realized, where's Jesus? And so after 3 days, they go back to the temple and they're on this manhunt to find Jesus. And in Luke 2, they find him. And here's what it says. After 3 days, they found him in the temple courts, sitting among the teachers, listening to them and asking questions. And it goes on. It says, everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. So questions and answers. Why? Because at the age of 12, Jesus would have been Bet Talmud. He would have been doing the very thing that he was learning. And so when his parents come back and they find him in the temple, they find him doing the very thing at that age that he would be learning to do. It's fascinating. And so to continue on, after the age of 14, they would be Bet Midrash, and this is age 14 and up. And this is where you get into the best of the best. This is where the students would learn to apply the oral and written law. This is an incredible portion of the thing. And one of the things you need to understand about rabbis is they had their own interpretation of what it meant to live out the Torah. So they had developed this list of rules and regulations, this interpretation of what it would mean. So what they would do is they would take a commandment, say Leviticus 19, which is love your neighbor, and they would have this list of rules and regulations as to what they believed it meant to live out love your neighbor. And a rabbi's particular interpretation, their list of rules and do's and don'ts, their interpretation of the Torah was known as that rabbi's yoke. And so when you were studying under a rabbi, you would take their yoke, you would take their interpretation, you would take their rules and regulations, their interpretations of what it meant to live out that scripture, you would take that yoke upon you. And so Jesus comes along, and he's speaking to a group of people, and this is what he says. He says, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. So Jesus, he comes among us, and he comes as this Jewish rabbi, and when he says things like this, he's not just throwing out phrases, he's not just picking them out of thin air or pulling them out of a hat. Okay, this was understood culture, and Jesus was speaking to these very people that had grown up in this culture, and he's saying, I'm real, and I'm God, and I've come that you might have life and that you might have it to the full. And Jesus would say, I haven't come to abolish the law. I didn't come to kind of spit on it and throw it under the table. I didn't come to wipe away everything that you've learned and everything that God has shown you from the beginning. Jesus would say, I've come to show you what it looks like in flesh and blood. So, at age 14, again, we're at Bet Midrash, okay? And so at age 14, this is the best of the best. This is the Harvard, the Yale, the Carleton. This is like where you get to the cream of the crop. And every student in this culture wanted to be a rabbi. They were the rock stars. They were the superstars. They were the singers. They were the celebrities of the day. And everybody grew up wanting to be a rabbi. It would be the modern day equivalent of us going into a high school today and walking in during career day and the line being out the door for people who wanted to be a pastor. Probably not going to happen I don't know what high school you went to, but it certainly wasn't the case at mine, right? It's just something we don't understand. But in this culture, in this context, everybody wanted to be a rabbi. And so what they would do is they would go to a rabbi whose yoke they wanted to take upon them, one whose interpretation they respected and valued. And they would go to that rabbi and they would say this. They would say, I want to become your disciple. So they would stand in front of this rabbi and they'd say, I want to become your disciple. And so that rabbi then would engage them in what are called remezes. Remezes are essentially a quiz to determine how well they knew the Torah. And so they would ask them question after question. They'd just grill them like that. Like, give me the 4 references to, Deuteronomy that are found in the book of Habakkuk and give them to me in order. And the student would just be kind of rattling off questions. And then after that, they would kind of engage in more of conversation and more questions until the rabbi had enough from the conversation to determine, does this person have what it takes? Does this student have what it takes to be my disciple? Do they have what it takes to be just like me? And if they did, if they believed that this student was the best of the best, that they had exactly what it takes to be just like them, they would say, yes, take my yoke upon you and become my disciple. And this was the highest honor in Jesus' day. And if that happened to you, if you were told yes, you'd leave everything. You'd leave your father, your mother, your family, your siblings. You'd leave your synagogue. You would leave everything that you were doing, your family business. You'd walk away from everything that you knew up until that point and devote the rest of your life to being just like your rabbi, because that was the goal. The goal was that you would eventually become exactly like your rabbi, that you would become so close and so connected, that you would walk so closely with this rabbi that you would become exactly like them. That was the goal. And there's really, the more that you understand this culture, it's really powerful. There's a quote from the Mishnah, which is a collection of Jewish writings, and this is what it says. It says, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. And see, the idea behind this quote, the idea behind this phrase was that if you walked as closely as you should with your rabbi, that if you walked with him through the dusty streets of the Holy Land, that the closer you walked to him, as he walked and as you followed, he would be kicking up dust. And the closer you walk with him, the more of his dust you would get on you. And rabbis were intense. They were hilarious. They were sarcastic. They were respected. They were revered. They were the superstar celebrities of the day. And as you walk closely with your rabbi, you would actually be covered in their dust. That is, of course, if a rabbi said yes. Because there was always the chance that a rabbi would quiz you, that he would see how well you knew Torah and come to the decision that you weren't the best of the best, that you didn't have what it takes, that you weren't good enough, that you weren't smart enough, that you didn't have the ability, you didn't have that thing to become just like him. And so he would say something along the lines of, thanks for applying, thanks for the conversation. Clearly you're passionate about God, you're passionate about Torah, but I'm sorry, you don't have what it takes. You don't have it in you to be just like me. So go home, make babies, pray they become rabbis, and in the meantime, ply your trade. And when the rabbi would say, ply your trade, what he was saying is look, go home, figure out what the family business is, learn how to do that, and do that. And you don't have what it takes to be a rabbi, but maybe one of your kids will be a rabbi, so in the meantime, just simply ply your trade. Now, with all of that in the backdrop, I want to bring us to the book of Matthew, specifically Matthew chapter 4. And as we look at this, I'm hoping that in just a few moments, a whole bunch of lights are going to be going off in your head. Let's look at this. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon called Peter and Andrew, and they were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Why are they fishermen? Because they were told no. They were told they weren't good enough. They didn't make the cut. They weren't the best of the best. They were told that they didn't have it in them to be just like a rabbi. They were told no. And so what's interesting about this is that Jesus walks along the shore and he goes and he calls these people, he calls the cultural rejects, the cultural losers of the day, and he calls them, and this is what he says. He says, come and follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. And the interesting thing, and I've read this passage, and many of you grew up and you've heard this over and over and over again, but I'll be honest, it doesn't really make a whole lot of sense, really. When you think about it rationally and logically, and you read this, you're like, wait a minute, Jesus just comes along and he says, hey, drop what you're doing and come and follow me. And this is what it says, at once, they left their nets and followed him. It's like, did he hypnotize them? Did he brainwash them? What in the world? Just drop what you're doing. Just drop your responsibilities. Just leave it there and just on the drop of a dime, come and follow me. And they do it. Why? Because he's a rabbi. And he's calling disciples. He's calling disciples. They've heard no over and over and over again. And Jesus says, come and follow me. And as a Jewish rabbi, they've heard no, 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 no. And this rabbi, the rabbi, Jesus says, come and follow me. In a sense, what he's saying is that he believes that they have the ability to be just like him. He believes that they can actually do it. So of course they drop what they're doing. Of course they drop their nets. Of course they follow him because the entire system was designed. The culture they grew up in was they go to a rabbi and they apply. But this rabbi has come and calls them. And what does he do with them? This is the point. If you have a seatbelt, fasten it. And if you're watching online, this is the part where you kind of lean in, because as we continue on in the book of Matthew in light of everything I've just shown you, hopefully it's going to blow your mind. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi. Now, Caesarea Philippi means nothing to us, but let me tell you this. Vegas has nothing on Caesarea Philippi. Okay, what stayed in Caesarea Philippi, what happened there, stayed there. Jewish people did not go to Caesarea Philippi. This was the center, one of the centers of pagan worship of the day. There was all kinds of debauchery and idolatry that was going on. There was witchcraft, and there was all kinds of just sexual things that were going on, not just with people, but with animals. This place was messed up, okay? And again, as the center of pagan and idol worship of the day, there was this huge, huge cliff at Caesarea Philippi, and it was known as the Rock. And at Caesarea Philippi, this rock, you could get to the top of it, and you could look down, and you could see all of Caesarea Philippi. And on the edge of this huge rock, on the edge of the cliff, on the edge of this place called the Rock, there was this massive cave. And the cave, it was believed that this is where demons and spirits entered into the known world from the spirit realm. And as pagan worshipers, what they did is they built a temple right in front of this cave, and they began to have these festivals because, again, they believed that demons and spirits entered in, that if you wanted to engage and connect with the spirit world, you needed to be at this place. And this cave that was on the side of the rock was called the Gates of Hell. And Jewish boys never went to Caesarea Philippi, let alone near this cave or near the rock. So what does Jesus do? Well, he grabs a group of late high school age guys and he travels them 30 miles, and he brings them to the top of this rock. And he asks them a question. Here's what he says. When Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? Now, one author I really respect, says he might have kind of leaned over and looked down on Caesarea Philippi and said, "Who do people say the Son of Man is?" And they replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets." In other words, they're like, nobody really knows. Like everybody's got a kind of an opinion, everybody's got an idea, but Jesus said, "But what about you? What about you?" he asked. "Who do you say that I am?" And Simon Peter goes on, Simon Peter answered, "You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God." And Jesus replies to him, and he says, "Blessed are you, Simon, son of Jonah, for this was not revealed to you by flesh and blood, but by my Father in heaven." And then he goes on and he says, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church." What is he talking about? It says, upon that culture, upon that mindset, upon that idolatry, and upon that type of worship, and upon that worldview, on this very rock, I'm going to build my church. And he goes on and he says, "And the gates of hell will not overcome it." And here's these young boys who were repeatedly told no, and they say yes to Jesus, having no idea what in the world they were getting themselves into. And Jesus takes them to this place. They've just gotten out of puberty, for crying out loud. And Jesus brings them to the center of pagan worship and says, "I'm going to build my church on this." And they're thinking, what are we doing here? If my mom finds out, I'm dead. Like, this is crazy. And Jesus is saying, "I'm going to build my church." And he hands them the keys to the church, and he says, "You are the ones that are going to carry my name." And there are going to be people sitting in church in Canada, Ontario in 2019 because of your yes. Having no idea what he was talking about. And you are here today because of the yes 12 young men said years and years and years ago. We should not settle for status quo as a church. We were wired for revolution. We were wired to impact and shape the culture. We are called, like these young men, to carry, to be ambassadors of the name of Jesus Christ. We shouldn't just settle and say, this is as good as it gets. Things are, we're okay where we are. No! We should be bold. We should be confident. We should be expectant. We should be praying, believing that God is going to do immeasurably more than anything that we could possibly ask or imagine. And rather than simply pray, "Oh God, do some wonderful things in our city," we should say yes to see those things happen in Jesus' name. That we should be a community of people that collectively say yes to create an opportunity for someone who has repeatedly said no to finally say yes to Jesus. And so once again, I ask you, collectively, I ask you, and individually, I ask you to say yes. And again, today, in this season, I'm asking you to say yes to a financial commitment. But there will always be something in front of us. There will always be a challenge for us to overcome as we continue to say yes to the mission and the vision that God has called you and I to. But I should not be fearful. I should be feeling empowered and emboldened because Jesus said, "I'm going to create and institute and begin my church, and there is nothing that can stop it." And we are here today because of their yes. Who might be here tomorrow because of yours? Personally, I would love to find out. So I ask you yet again, I ask you to say yes. And if you still think we're talking about money, you've missed it. We're talking about saying yes so someone has the opportunity to say yes to Jesus. Let me close by simply saying this. May you be covered in the dust of your rabbi.